Today, we're speaking to Rosemary Sandison, a former town planner from Cape Town and a seasoned property investor, and Anton van Niekerk, a photographer, environmentalist, and secretary of the Greater Kyami Conservancy. It's interesting how the court thing keeps haunting me at the moment. I've had two tenant situations, and I was thinking to myself, in 25 years doing property, it's taken 25 years to be in court. I'm like, okay, I'm not doing badly. I felt very sorry for myself for the first time, because it's like such a waste of time. You're just sitting.
Money, yeah.
No money, because it was a small claims court, and we won. It was actually
well done.
It was actually quite unfortunate on that we had to waste our time for that. But be that as it may, but I thought, okay, we're clearly doing a lot right, because you're thinking, why me? But then you think it has to be right if in 25 years is my first one. Hopefully there won't be another one, but yeah.
And what was that, for a default?
No, the tenant was trying to squeeze some money out of the landlord, and they brought us in as the agents. They were actually just trying to find a way to make money out of the landlord. The long and the short of it was, they claimed stuff was stolen from inside the unit because the landlord wasn't fixing the unit, but there was all the evidence that they were fixing the unit, and the theft wasn't proven. It was alleged. So, and they didn't have their personal insurance, which tenants should know that they should have. Yeah. We have it also in the lease agreement. They sign it as a responsibility on their side. Then they tried to then turn it around that it's our company was negligent in maintaining, but then we had all the evidence that we were maintaining, everything on point and all that. So it actually became nothing, but it was a good full day of hanging around courtrooms.
You're lucky it was dealt with in one day.
Yeah, so that's well, I believe so. I didn't have a point of reference, so for me it was very traumatic, and I didn't feel lucky at all. But I'm glad it's over. And then the second one now that is probably coming up is where tenant destroyed a landlord's property to a tune of about 400,000. So the landlord's taking them to court, and that we're gonna be witnessing. Because we did the inspections and all that, and it's quite unfortunate again because it's a lot of money. But this is now something that happened 4 years ago, and very unfortunately, I don't see this landlord getting their money back.
Was there no provision in the lease?
There was all the provision is there. So in terms of winning the case, the landlord's lawyers have no doubt that they'll win the case.
Yeah. But where will they get the money?
Precisely. So now, when we had the meeting with the lawyers just to brief us, because they would like us to witness on behalf of the landlord, in that whole conversation, it became very clear to me that this landlord has literally spent the last 4 years in hell, going through extensions, no shows at appointed dates and all those things. And even though all the proof is there, the ex-tenant is now saying, well, I don't have the money. So, it's unfortunate. It comes down, and I would love to hear your opinion, because I've always maintained, in all the years, in all the hundreds and thousands of rentals we've done and sales, that you never want to end up in court. So no matter what, there has to be a settlement or an agreement or some mediation, negotiation. But
now mediation is forced on litigants.
Should we start this thing, and then we can...
We've already doing it.
Are we? Mitigation measures have been brought in by the courts themselves, which costs. It costs. Again,
so lawyers cost.
It costs, but maybe it avoids going to court, and maybe it results in settlement.
What's CSOS?
Because
that's kind of, so basically...
sounds like a tongue twister.
I deal as a community police foreman. I used to do police work. I spent a lot of time in court. And so for me, it was the biggest waste of my time ever. It was one of the things that was nice. Getting out of doing police service was not having to do all these court appearances. you go to court, and then there's a remand, and then there's new evidence, and then they change a lawyer, and then they pull a Stalingrad move, and you've wasted your time that isn't recouped or given back in any way. So a lot of what the policing services and, as you say, the courts have done is they're now actually seeking mediation. Mediation means that both parties will be there. You're not going to have it where you're meant to be in court at 9, so you arrive at 8:30, and your case is only heard at 2 or 3 or whatever in the afternoon. So you've wasted an entire day. With mediation, you've got a time, you arrive at the time, you both sit down. It's a lot faster, more efficient. And so that is the preferred route. You've got much less in legal fees. Your time isn't wasted, and you can often then meet a resolve or find out there is no grounds of meeting, and so you can then pursue legal equity.
What is quite important, though, is in mediation, if you come to a settlement, it's quite important to request that become an order of court, which is very quick, so that you've got something to hold on to, rather than
some stick of some sort.
Yeah.
Yes.
So always request that it becomes an order of court.
And within body corporates and things like that,
then we've got CSOS.
Then we've got CSOS.
And you know, the marvelous thing about CSOS, which is the Community Schemes Ombud facility, the marvelous thing about that is that you pay R100 if you've got a case, and they pick up your case for you if you're a sectional title owner or you have to have paid your CSOS levies, of course.
So who can approach them?
So
sectional title
owners, body corporates can approach them as well, and that costs R100. Unfortunately, I've never had a case with CSOS, fortunately, because I believe they're taking quite a long time, and sometimes the decisions are not perhaps as professional as they should be, but it's a facility that can be used, and I think it's very important and useful.
But does it have the power of a court?
Exactly the same power.
Okay.
Exactly the same power.
Okay.
And they can enforce it. Yeah.
And in terms of when you said a body corporate can approach them as well, so does this mean if an owner is misbehaving, breaking the rules of the estate, can the body corporate approach against that owner, even though that owner is also paying the R100?
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So what kind of cases would one approach them for?
Okay, if somebody's perhaps taken over some land that belongs to the body corporate itself rather than being private land. So, you know, I just saw a recent case where somebody had chosen to just extend their portion, and they'd extended it with fabric fencing, which looked rather odd, and they refused to move it. So in that case, a body corporate could go to CSOS, or a neighbour could go to CSOS. Anybody who's offended by what is done could go to CSOS.
The case that I came across is one of the people preferred to park his car in a parking bay instead of the correct place, and refused to adhere. So if your body corporate rules don't have any kind of teeth to them, then you'd have to approach CSOS to actually come to some kind of a resolve on it.
And that's so important with body corporates, to make sure their rules are appropriate and are up to date. I'm a trustee on an old block, and we looked at our rules, and our rules were delightful. The language was delightful, but completely inappropriate, and completely not part of the Sectional Title Management Act and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So we're in the process of changing that, and it's quite a big job. But you know, body corporates have to keep up to date, and they have to keep up to date with the legislation as well, because there's certain prescribed conditions that apply.
I didn't actually know there was a Sectional Title Act, because I often come across these body corporate rules when we are called in to defend disturbance of the peace, or a rowdy, or a problematic incident in an area. And often they've got fines and things like that get imposed to keep people in order and keep them straight. I didn't realize there was an act actually for that.
Yes,
okay.
And prescribed rules.
Okay.
So yeah, you know, you have to keep up to date with that if you're a trustee, or even if you're an owner. I advise all owners, when they're buying into a sectional scheme, read the rules just so that you know what the rules are, because so few owners tend to do that and then get surprised.
But that's actually a very interesting question I wanted to ask is, obviously owners buying a sectional scheme, let's say they've read the rules and rules don't necessarily have everything that is actually enforced. So my first question was going to be who initiates changes, or like you said, keep up to date. Who is responsible? Is it the managing agent who is appointed? Can it be initiated from owners who say, okay, we feel the rules are not sufficient or whatever? And then how can rules be changed later on? Yeah.
Okay. Now, sectional title is such an interesting body because everybody who owns in that complex is a member of that body corporate. Yeah. They just choose trustees to do the daily work, and then a managing agent will probably do the overseeing and day-to-day work, and often the guidance of trustees. But as an owner, you are able to request changes. You're able to speak to your trustees and say, I think we need to change our rules to include this. And the trustees should be doing that. They should be updating the rules. It's a mission. You've got to submit them to your change of rules to CSOS. But if they're rules which fall into the Sectional Title Act or part of the management prescription rules, CSOS are fine. You know, they'll just sign it off, and then those become your rules. Obviously, what you want to do is you want to perhaps have a meeting with all the owners and find out if there are any other rules that the owners feel that they should be putting in, or put rules towards those owners and say, does everybody agree to this? Because you need to have, it depends on the rules that you've put in your body corporate, but generally 33% of the owners have to agree.
How do you find out?
I think it's 33 or 50. It depends what your rules are as well.
How do you find out if your complex is registered with CSOS? Because obviously CSOS is something that you want to be a part of because it's got a bit of teeth.
The law says they all have to be registered with CSOS. So even if you're like
the moment you're a sectional title,
you have to be registered. It's the law. It's the law. And what's quite interesting, and that's fine with sectional title schemes because that's traditionally what we're used to. But in areas like in Kyami area where people have a hectare, and there was an anomaly which was approved by the deeds office as well as approved by council irregularly in agricultural land, which they've stopped now because it's not legal. But there are sectional title schemes where it's only two owners.
Yes.
And they by law have to be registered with CSOS. And many of them aren't, because many of them don't even have their rules. They don't have meetings because it's two people.
But you say Kyami, but do you know that Pretoria, there's a massive amount of units that are it's duets. And, all our Pretoria agents are constantly selling duets where the one, stand of 1,000 square meter got subdivided into two. And we are aware that they all have to be registered, they have to do all that. But in Pretoria, it's just accepted. You are unit 1A and you're unit 1B, that's it. Those owners have no understanding, or there is no enforcement for sure. But how does that work? Or will there be an enforcement at some point?
Are they not just subdivided stands? Are they sectional title?
The by nature of being a duet, they are actually sectional title.
They can be subdivided.
They are attached to each other though, and they have to. So they definitely fall under needing to be registered as a sectional title unit.
Not necessarily. It depends on the density in the area that we're talking about. For example, in Cape Town, if we look at Claremont and places like this, in Harfield Village, where often there's semi-detached, as they used to be called. Yeah. Those are subdivided properties. So those are individual stands on their own, even though they're completely attached. So those are private properties that share a common boundary. So sectional title helps in a way because you can speak to your neighbour and say, look, we both need to maintain this or whatever. But it can also be a subdivided stand if the density is permitted to go down to small portions. In agricultural land, you can't subdivide below Morgan, which is 8,400 watt. So
8,400
yeah,
square
that's right.
meters.
Yeah. So you can't subdivide below that, but you can in some areas, depending on your zoning, allow 2 dwellings. Often that was a second dwelling, perhaps for a family extension or whatever. And those, there was a time when they would subdivide those as sectional title because they couldn't get individual ownership by subdividing the land, because that would bring it below the 8,400.
Right.
Okay. So that was where sectional title came in. But there's the Subdivision of Agricultural Land Act as well, which impacts that, which was ignored. So now you can't do sectional title anymore. So there are a few of those anomalies, and those people should all be registered with CSOS. I try and encourage it because, when you've got 2 people, you need an intermediary to settle a dispute. And CSOS, that's where CSOS would come in as well if you're registered with CSOS. And it costs you R100. You don't have to take anybody to court.
This is my biggest horror story that I ever heard of. We've had, so in our area, I'm from Kyami, we actually live very close to each other. And I've been contacted in the last year by people saying, we're in a sectional title with my neighbor, and we've only got 1 water meter, or we've only got 1 electricity meter, and we want to now do this, and this. And I spoke to Rosemary about it to try and get clarity on this matter. And Rosemary then spoke to me about the horrors of sectional title. And it's something I think people need to go into fully aware if you're only doing 2 dwellings on a sectional title. If it's 16 units or 20 units and you've got a big body corporate and you've got big corporate rules and everything's set up properly and it's well maintained, well managed, well overseen, etc., no problem at all. When it's just 2 people, I think it's the most dangerous thing to ever buy into, because you're buying into the whim of your neighbor. If your neighbor wants to let his place go to rack and ruin, and she wants to then do things that are going to degrade the value of your property, you've got no power and no say. Your sale of your property is dependent upon your neighbor. Whereas in these complexes, you can't let this happen, you can't let that go overgrown, you can't do these things. There's lovely guiding rules. But when there's 2 people, if they haven't registered with CSOS and if they haven't got some agreements that's standing and enforceable, that's the main thing, is it enforceable? I would stay away. And it was the thing I went to Rosemary, and she then guided me on some opinion on that. I don't know if you've got more you want to add.
Well, yeah, recently somebody had sold a property, and the buyer had said it was subject to them getting their own water supply from City of Joburg, and it was a sectional title property, and certainly with City of Joburg, I'm not too sure about Pretoria, but I would imagine it's the same. They only have to supply the point to the stand, and thereafter it would be split inside the property with a meter to both, so both people know what they're using. And that's up to those 2 owners to make that happen. It's not up to the council. And they had it as subject to. And this agent was saying, well, what do we do? What do we do? I said, well,
because
there's
what do you do?
There's certain legalities as well that you aren't allowed to do. I think it's with electricity.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I mentioned that I think the condition would have to be amended by mutual agreement, because you can't physically make that happen. You can't force the council to put 2 separate points on a property for water. They're only going to do 1. And so, they then had to negotiate with the buyer and say it's not possible.
Because this property that they were communicating with, the person installed a solar system. Now, the challenge with solar systems is a lot of people go for the cheaper installer. And what we're finding with Eskom when they come out and they're doing problems with feeds is they're trying to do repairs, and suddenly they're getting shocked because a lot of these solar systems are actually backfeeding into the system. So they've tripped their breakers. Everything should now be off. And they go to handle the things and they're getting quite a whack. And so they get quite upset because they then have to tell that person, if they're home, please turn off your solar system. So the reason I raised that is what happened is the guy's solar thing was then backfeeding into his meter that he had with his neighbor who is a landowner with him. and was actually giving a false reading on the account of what they were owing. And so they were trying to get costs from owner A, and owner B was having to foot these costs. And now they had no stick to have over each other. And so they were wanting to then have separate meters. And then I was being guided by Rosemary on what the legalities are. And it really is a thing that you have to find out what the legalities are about splitting electricity meters, splitting water meters, and having an agreement with your person who shares the land with you, because this neighbor is horrendous and problematic, and now you've got very little stick to get that person to adhere, and so it makes your life a living nightmare. Then you've got litigation and legal costs, and it's just burning money. So you're losing money on this person who's defective.
Yes.
And you're having to pursue legal fees because that person is defective. So if you have got set up some conditions, some guidelines, some rules, that you've got teeth with CSOS over your person, everybody's friendly until they're not. So set it up before it becomes a problem.
And also people say, well, no, my co-partner or the co-owner, but they're actually co-partners.
Yeah.
They're lovely people. They might be lovely for the next 5 years, and then they might sell.
Until the divorce
It's always
like that. Everything's great.
Or the new owner. You don't know who the new owner, and
Yeah.
suddenly you're in business or in partnership with
Yeah.
somebody you've never seen before.
But I mean, we're now making it sound like anything sectional title is horrific. We're only
Not at
talking
all.
when you are going into a marriage, sectional title marriage with one other person,
Yes.
which is the same advice everyone gives you if you're going into partnership with someone. It will be it's a recipe for disaster. So, but a normal sectional title, which is basically every apartment setup in South Africa, that is governed, and they are a lot more compliant. How do you know? Before I ask you how you know if they're compliant, actually, I had the most interesting question. You know how every day something new comes up and you think you're so knowledgeable and you're actually not? So we've got this German family looking to buy in Cape Town. So they've now identified the place. We've gotten financials. It's a lovely unit by the looks of things. And
Sectional
I'm explaining
title.
sectional title. It's an apartment. It's actually, it's on 3 levels. Lovely. Anyway, but I'm explaining sectional title to them, and they say, oh, so one day when the building needs to be demolished, I own nothing. And I was like, well, where you come from, what happens if the building where you own an apartment needs to be demolished? In my mind, because I've never encountered that. I've never sold a property that needed to be demolished after the fact. So I realized I don't have the answer past the insurance situation. So would that be covered by your building insurance? Will whoever decides your building needs to be demolished need to pay you the value? How does that work?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And, particularly looking at some of those sites in Israel and Iran where this building has been demolished.
Okay, but that is insurance claim.
Insurance will cover it.
Yes.
Insurance will cover it.
Although most insurances say no war.
Exactly.
Not no acts of war. But
Yeah.
let's say they say the building has to be condemned. It is now, in Europe, you get a lot of buildings that are built by, it's slabs of cement.
Yes.
And they're supposed to have 50-year span, but then they recondition them after the fact.
Yeah.
So, for instance, my family, they're in a building of 70 years, even though it's cement. So hence I'm saying I've never encountered that. So would someone offer you a payment if they say this building is no longer?
I'm just trying to think out of the box, because of course when you own in a sectional title here in South Africa anyway, what is also required of the body corporate is to put in a 10-year maintenance plan. So continuous maintenance has to be done on a building, which maybe at some stage can include very expensive remedial measures. But if the building is so bad, all those people you own are responsible at the end of the day if that now has to be demolished. And I'm afraid you would only, if somebody's going to buy the land, because that's the only sale document you would have, then you would all be given a portion of whatever came out of the sale of the land. But that's
From the land.
that's all that would be due to you, because I presume it's been taken place because the body corporate hasn't been maintaining the building, and then it would be condemned. So everybody then is responsible. Of course, some of those people could then take the trustees to court, but the degradation would have been over so many years. Who do you take to court? You know, so I would imagine you're only going to get a small recompense for your portion of that piece of land.
So I'm glad to hear that you also haven't encountered this as much, because I thought to myself, is this something that happens?
It's very rare in South Africa that we have condemned buildings. We do if you have fire, and if you have sinkholes, and then there's major degradation. But it's rare that we have a building being condemned and then listed for
certainly
due to non-maintenance.
Yeah, normally it's gone really down for years and years. So people should sort of see something's coming.
Yeah. And you know, it could happen for the much older buildings in our maybe central Pretoria or central
Joburg, definitely.
For sure.
Yeah.
No maintenance. But at the end of the day, you're all responsible. Okay. And that's what's so important, I think, when you're buying into sectional title. Know who your trustees are, know what they're doing. Ask for that 10-year maintenance plan. And there are professional guys who do that for you. You know, people say, oh, it's going to cost so much money to get a 10-year maintenance plan done for our building. I've just had one done for an old building, and it's cost 4,000 Rand. Wonderful. They're telling us what we have to do to keep this building maintained for the next 10 years.
And is that a building inspector?
They're valuers, they're engineers, and they do personal inspections, of course. They would inspect your property. Yeah. But they're in this particular one, in the one company, they're primarily valuers and engineers. So they know what to look for.
Okay.
And that's critical. That covers you as a trustee. And I would imagine if the building suddenly fell down through, who knows, maybe the lift shaft is so degraded, nobody's maintained that.
Yeah.
The trustees would be responsible, I think, for not seeing that
Going
and
on
doing
to
it.
what you said, which was the looking at buying property for investment. A lot of people see vacant land and they think, oh, I'm going to buy this vacant land because I can develop it into this, and this. We have this in our area a lot. We call them speculators. So somebody sees an empty plot, because it's an empty plot and it's in an agricultural area. It's relatively low cost versus what you would get in other areas. And so they buy the plots speculating that they're going to develop it into a 4-story walk-up, or they're going to develop it into warehousing or something and make X amount of money because their friend has made X amount of money off their development. Now, something we have in the Kyami area is the urban development boundary. And this is a line that the city councils draw up, and they say, okay, inside the urban development boundary, we've got almost unrestrained development. Obviously, you just have to apply for certain access to infrastructure, etc. But outside of the urban development boundary, the UDB, which Kyami is, you're restricted to the kinds of development you can do. And a lot of people buy property unaware of this. So what can be developed in and outside of the urban development boundary?
Okay, I think when people want to speculate on property, let's take it from that point of view. They might, in any city, just see this vacant piece of land and think, oh, it's within my price range. I can do what I want to do with it. Well, they can do things with it, but they should first check with the city town planners and find out where it is. For example, obviously inside the urban development boundary, you're allowed to do a lot more. You're allowed to go up to, in Joburg anyway, detailed density. They've made it a blanket pretty much in the spatial development framework and land use scheme that you can develop high density in all areas. And you'll see it in Brianston. Brianston is changing dramatically, and people are buying stands there and getting rezonings done. But you've got to go through the process. You've got to check with the town planners, check regarding road impact.
So who is a town planner, first of all? What does a town planner do?
Well, the city town planners are the people who will bring in policies. They should really be doing structure planning for particular areas. It doesn't happen too much in Johannesburg, sadly. It's just blanket zoning and blanket permissions. But you've got to go through the process of applications. Cape Town, I know they do structure plans for certain areas, so you know exactly what you can do. Johannesburg works on a slightly different process. What always helps is to speak to your local councillor as well. Find out from your councillor what impacts there are in your particular area. If there's road impact, if there's sewerage, if there's services limitations, because you're going to have to use those. If they're non-existent in an area, rather look for an area where there is infrastructure for you to be allowed to do any sort of high density or redevelopment.
Because like in our area, we're on 99% septic tanks. So there is no sewage. So if a person, say it was allowed, say you were to now, they remove the urban development boundary, say you could develop, you would have to lay down access to sewage pipes, which could be a few hundred meters to a few kilometers. And what a lot of people don't understand is they call it bulk contributions. So a person says, I can buy the plot for 4 million. It's going to cost me another 25 to develop these walk-ups. So that's then, say, 30 million, and I can do that with these costs, and that's fine. What they don't understand is bulk contributions. Now I have to do my connection of sewage, maybe a kilometer. Now, because I've got 150 units that I'm going to be putting up, I have to do traffic widening. And I have to now include that road improvements as well. So there's a lot of costs that people don't realize. And so we see people actually start. They clear land, they start to put up the building, and then we watch it sitting and sitting and sitting. And you can see that the people haven't done the full value of the math. So a lot of people jump into property extremely ignorant of what it takes, because they think basic maths. They haven't gone into all the other implications that go into it.
Yeah, someone told them, I'll build for you for 10,000 per square meter, and you do a mental math that, for your 100 units, this is what it will cost you, and you don't have any of that in mind.
And then can I just add to that?
Yeah.
What they also forget is the holding costs, because if you have to rezone land, so you've bought the piece of land, you've already got your engineer and your architects doing the whole design, and hopefully a town planner to inform you of what's going on, and you've submitted your rezoning application, because you're moving perhaps from single residential area to high density development. If you have an objection to that application, town planner say no, it'll fly through. But you happen to have madam down the road who says, no, not in my area. And you might know that there's no chance that the city of whatever will listen to that objection. She's still a valid objector. He or she is still, or a couple or whoever, are still valid objectors. So you then have to go through that whole objection process, which can delay your development by 2 or 3 years.
2 or 3 years.
2 or 3 years, yeah. And then
for one objection.
For one.
If most of
one
your
is as
neighbors
powerful
object,
as 200. One is as powerful as 200. They still have the legal right to be heard. And the city might side with it. The city officials might say, we don't have enough infrastructure to support that type of development here. And that can delay your development considerably. So that increases costs as well. And if you're looking at, for example, a service station, some people think, oh, great, yes, I'll rent it to a BP or whatever.
I think it's a huge money spinner. People hear, obviously, an ideal petrol station. They're hearing the perfect case scenario.
We get a lot of that.
No one listens to the bad case scenarios. So they hear the best one and they think, oh, perfect, I'm going to put this up. I'm going to print money. Literally, they then think of the next development they're going to do after the petrol station, because the petrol station is just going to be, I don't know where I'm going to put all the money, but it's just going to come in. So then,
Having a wanting to have a petrol station, you not only have to go through a rezoning, but you've got to go through different types of rezonings before you can even get to the town planning rezoning, because you've got to go through the provincial government as well, and you also need to do an environmental study on the area, which can take up to 3 years. Just the EIA that might be required.
And what is the cost for that, more or less? Obviously, I know it can be different, but
hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds
of thousands.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's petrochemical, so there's more. You've got to do attenuation dams. There's a lot that goes into petrol stations, and the risk, it's petrochemicals. I mean, it's you can't be closer than this to that. You can't be. So people just don't do their maths when they're thinking petrol stations as these huge money churners. And also, what's your proximity to other service stations? Then there's a lot that comes into it. Yeah.
So sorry, we digressed a little bit from the urban development boundary story. So inside the urban development boundary, the permissions are much easier to get, but there's still all those considerations within a density problem area. And then outside the urban development boundary, generally there's a limit to the extent of the urbanity, if you want to call it, because all cities are trying to limit their urban sprawl. And certainly a lot of cities are saying we can't go beyond that because we can't afford to support the services outside that area. So generally, if somebody's looking to invest outside an urban development boundary, they need to understand that the city is unlikely to support any infrastructure development. In fact, it's legislated, certainly in Johannesburg, that they should not approve increased infrastructure.
And this is something we just don't, because it's already happened, we think, it's the norm. The city of Johannesburg themselves have said 2 of the greatest nooses around their neck as far as infrastructure has been the waterfall development in Steyn City. So we took for granted that these were, it's just common. It was okay. They were denied initially through their environmental impact assessments the right to actually do those developments. At first, they were going to be golf courses. This is waterfall initially. So that's where the application was first put through. And then things change, things happen. We're not going to discuss that. But the fact is, the city says they've put a huge burden upon us now from an infrastructure point of view. And so we don't want these sorts of things before. So those 2 developments went through. They weren't desired by the city. They weren't sort of happy with the city because of the burden they put. Urban sprawl means they like to have, there's my city, and it goes out like this. But what we've done in South Africa is we've gone city, right out another city, right out another city, which just extends the cost to maintenance, the cost to infrastructure development and maintenance itself. So the city is against it. So a lot of people say, that happened there. I'm going to do the same over here. And they buy then 15 to 20 plots, which are relatively cheap. And they don't realize it's outside the urban development boundary. There is no infrastructure. The city has already got 2 big weights around their neck that they don't want to do again. So we see a lot of these speculations sitting 10, 15, 20 years because they cannot realize what they imagined would happen.
Quite right.
But speaking of that, then that road that we've been hearing, it feels like forever.
Yes.
Connecting Centurion with it's basically 4-ways area. It's going to go right across. Will it happen? Is it happening? Is it just like a threat that hangs above our heads? It may not happen, because what you're speaking about, a lot of people speculate that it will happen, and therefore a lot more the high density is going to start happening around alongside the road.
Well, that's happens all over South Africa, where people think, okay, here's a major freeway coming through, so I'm going to buy right next to it. And certainly outside the urban development boundary, it's a bit of folly, because even if that freeway happens, the off-ramps, you won't have access directly to that freeway. So the freeway might get built, but the peripheral roads that that might give you direct access onto the freeway generally aren't there because it's a freeway.
Okay.
And that road planning changes as well. So it's a risk. It's a risk to buy next to any future proposed road. I mean, I think some of the proposed roads between Fourways and Centurion have been legislated for years and years. And there are lots of people who are still sitting with land next door to the proposed freeway, waiting for it to happen. Who knows when it's going to happen? Money is limited. And in my view, and this is only a personal view, I think the cities are looking more at rather doing public transport between the two rather than making them freeways. We've got sufficient freeways. So look, we've already got the Gautrain, and I think they're going to focus more on putting money towards those rather than building new freeways. It's provincial, and who knows where that money is going to come from. Often what will happen, certainly with other sections of roads, will be developers will say, well, we're going to have to pay for that. So who knows? We might get another Dostane who says, no, I'll put all my money into making sure I have a major freeway going to my development. Yeah, that can happen, but unlikely, I think, so that, right now.
That road in particular, it's the K56 that's proposed to go through a large swath of Kyami. That area is outside of the urban development boundary, so people need to understand that. Say, for instance, the road went through, we see still many large aspects that haven't been accounted for. So the permissions were granted if they had roads like this, and this with the design, but the design currently has this, it's lacking that. So currently we see a flaw of this being approved because the disparity in the approval and planning process which was put forward. Now, as Rosemary was saying, people say, I can do unmitigated development along this entire course. What they're not understanding is with K routes, they only have off-ramps every so many, or connections every so many 100 meters, etc. So you've planned your development here, but it's far from any interconnectivity. The second aspect is it's outside the urban development boundaries. So you buy and you think, I'm going to do a 4-story walk-up, I'm going to do a petrol station, I'm going to do all these things. Meanwhile, that's not allowed in that area from a planning and zoning point of view. You can't do more than 30% coverage. So say you've got a plot, say it's 1,000 square meters, you can only do 300 square meters of coverage. So there are limitations on what you can't do. You can't do a hotel. You can do a boutique hotel, which is limited to so many rooms. You can do a B&B. You can do certain things, but you can't do other things. And everyone's saying, this is my big money spinner. I'm speculating I'm going to buy it because it's going to come through here. And quite frankly, that road might be realigned along a completely different route, which is what certain transport people would prefer. And so that would mean you've bought this property speculating the road's going to run right adjacent to it. Say you've got an off-ramp, on-ramp connectivity. Meanwhile, there's then a readjustment because this development cost of that road with what they require is too expensive. So it'll be more cost effective to do it over there. Suddenly this land that you bought speculating is worthless. The other thing is the PWV5, PWV9. These are highways, these are freeways that are meant to bisect through Kyami. A developer had two ends of the freeway system, and they sold to commercial developers and said, this is where the off-ramp's going to be over the freeway. And on the other end of the link, they said, it'll never happen. We're going to do housing. So people have bought the housing being told it'll never happen. And then people were sold the commercial and they're told it's definitely going to happen. This commercial developments happen. There's huge warehouses and lots of big developments. And it's sitting, that freeway may never connect despite what you've been told by your developer who proposed. And so from an investment point of view, it's something. So Rosemary has properties and does developments, and it's a question I asked her. A lot of people think there's a lot of money to be made in the rental area. So a question I'd say to Rosemary, what would you look at as an ideal for a rental property? As what is a safe investment, looking at an area's trajectory in terms of development and also downscale. Every area does an uplift, and then they do a stabilization, and then they do a dip down. And sometimes that can recover into something fantastic.
Okay, well, I must say, buying into sectional title, if you're an investor for rental, is probably the simplest, as long as you do your homework and make sure that you know the rules, it's an active body corporate, you've looked at the accounts of that sectional title scheme, you've looked at the bad debts of the sectional title scheme, and you've looked at the surrounding area of where the scheme is. If it's a high rise, you want to look and make sure that the services are sufficient. The basement doesn't get flooded on a regular basis, all those sort of things. Look at the building as if you were buying the whole building. It's so important. Make sure there's no vacant land next to your building, because somebody could build a 20-story next to you, and maybe your unit that you're looking to buy wouldn't get sunshine. It's very important to consider all those aspects. I think what is also so that's a good rental, but what you've also a rental market to look at. But what you've also got to look at is what's happening in the greater area. I sold in a particular area about 5 years ago, and I'm so glad I did, because the city policies allowed blanket development in that area, and they're actually allowing units to be built without parking bays, because they believe there's public transport coming through past the buildings.
No one's going to want a car.
Well, and unfortunately, I think, the first thing that people aspire to if they can't afford a property is to own their own car. So, I just looked at this in recent applications close to where I owned, and I just thought these buildings that are going up are going to have a completely unsatisfied demographic. I don't know who's going to buy in there. So maybe some of those buildings will not be as successful. And then I looked at what complaints were coming in from owners within that body corporate, where I did own. And I saw that there were some nefarious things that were starting to take place in this particular building. And that was happening in a number of buildings in this particular suburb in Joburg. And I just thought, no, it's time to sell. And I'm so glad I did. And I actually sold to my tenant who enjoyed living there at that time. She's also now subsequently sold because the area has just degraded. And certainly in Joburg, some of our areas are not being maintained as those beautiful treed environments anymore. Where you would have a sectional title with maybe larger units. Everybody had their parking bay, and you had visitors' bays, and there were trees, and there was space for swimming pools and things like that. In some areas, that's just not being built anymore. Now it's just mass density. So the demographics are changing, and the facilities aren't there for tenants. So that was a good one to get out of, and that's what you got to look for. And when you buy new, just make sure you read all the rules. What I have found is that if I'll explain one problem in a very popular suburb in Johannesburg where they're building high rise. They're allowing Airbnbs in those high rise. So owners are handing over their properties to an Airbnb deal maker, essentially. And where you're getting a majority of owners who own Airbnb being managed by the managing agent, which is happening, The people who've bought in that building to live in themselves or for their own investment are finding that they live in a hotel, and your security is compromised. You don't know who's coming in. People are renting a room for a night, and I've heard in some fancy-looking buildings, people are renting the room for an hour. So read into that as you want, but you're losing out on the security in that building. And if you're living there as your home, you're being compromised. So I know Airbnb is very popular, certainly with investors, but just be careful and ask what those rules are related to Airbnb. If there's no rule which limits short-term stays, be very aware, be very careful.
What are the liabilities that you found as a person who purchases to rent? You as a landlord, what are the sort of bigger things to account for or watch out for that can hit you financially?
Well, devaluation of your property. I mean, that's one of probably the worst thing that can happen to you, because you might be getting a rental, but at the end of the day, you also want to be able to sell for a pretty penny. And if you can't give it away, then there's no point, because your rental will be going down and your value is going down. So that's why I'm saying really look at the building and look at what's happening in the surrounding area. Also, you want to make sure that you have a thorough lease. I have my own lease agreement. I'm sure other investors do as well, where I put in my own conditions. And I don't rent to non-South Africans because I can't sue them. That's critical. Yeah.
That's happening a lot.
Yeah. So be very careful on that. You can be very careful on who you rent to. Do a thorough TPN check. Get a letter from their employers to confirm that they are in fact employed. Oh, I'll tell you a funny story. I had a lovely lady who applied for a rental, and the rental, it was a 1-bedroom unit, and she was earning 30,000 Rand a month. She showed me her bank statements. So she was earning enough to cover it, but I didn't have a letter from her employer. So I phoned her employer, and the employer said yes, she worked for them. And I said, I've got a salary slip here for 30,000 Rand a month. Is that still valid? And there was silence on the other side. And the person said, no, she's a cleaner with us. So the bank statement had been doctored. So do your homework, investors. Do your homework. The bank statement, and when I looked at the interest didn't work. There was no interest.
Okay.
So the bank, the figures didn't match up. So always do your checks.
But I mean, it's very interesting. Obviously, from my side as an agent, we do those checks. But I've always been curious, as an investor, are you purely buying in order to earn a certain net income, after, purchase price versus what your rent will be minus the levy and the rates and taxes? Or do you sometimes select, like you said, a building that you see is going to increase in value, or it's in a good area and you're buying it and the rent is almost secondary, that is someone's maintaining your property whilst it's growing in value? What are the considerations when you're selecting what to buy? Is it purely how much is my rent going to be?
I'm buying as yes, I need to know that I can achieve a rental. So I need to know that it's an area that's desirable for people to rent in. But I'm buying primarily for capital gain purposes.
Okay.
I know people say, oh no, you mustn't invest in property. And particularly in South Africa, don't invest in property, rather invest in shares or whatever. I like to control where my money is going. And so it's very important that I invest in a building that I know is going to increase in value. And that's where maybe my town planning and property valuation background comes in. But as I said, even in some areas I've had to sell, and fortunately sold to a tenant, and I do my own transactions, so I don't have to pay commission. But you're looking for capital growth. There's very little capital growth in South Africa at the moment. So even if you're staying stable, then you're still at least getting your rental income. So you're getting a return on on that investment. Maybe not so much capital growth. There has been capital growth on most of my properties, but it's gone stagnant. We know that for a lot of properties. Certainly in that Johannesburg area. Cape Town, of course, has been a totally different story. And there you're getting your capital growth and you're getting a great rental income. Great investment. I don't know why people are saying don't invest in property. It's madness, because at least you've got bricks and mortar to sell. And also, what other business can you ask for an escalation of CPI? At least you're keeping up with CPI. So I think it's a great investment. It's been doing fine for my husband and I. So, but we do manage it very well as well, and we do our own management. So I'm not giving percentages away either. We're keeping that pretty much in house.
So something that I've seen a lot with people that want to start investing, and such as what you just said, they prefer brick and mortar versus cryptocurrency or whatever the case may be. So that's all good and well, but there's this, I believe, misguided perception. I haven't seen those kinds of returns where they're going to get a full bond, in a R1 million property, which means 10,000 plus, and they will rent to cover the bond and the levy and the rates and taxes. I've not seen it. I don't know if such properties exist in South Africa. I see it, the higher end the property, the less, your percentages. So you're looking at 0.3% if you're lucky on the, a lot of those high end apartments. Are you chasing a specific percentage after you've deducted or you just focusing on your capital growth?
Look, I mean, at one stage, we were targeting 10%. 10%?
Before, after levy? Before levy.
Yeah,
before.
Yeah, before.
But there's a net.
But there's a net, There's a net after that. Look, we know I'm still, fortunately I bought a while ago, and what I did was I used property that I owned and had the equity in to leverage the next property. So my tenants ended up paying for my properties.
Yeah.
Essentially, that's what I did, and it works. It worked very well. So if you've got extra capital, remember you can't buy into shares with a bond. So if you've got extra capital, put it into a property, and then the bond is your best friend as long as you keep on servicing it and servicing it well, and then hopefully you're getting your rental, and it's a long-term plan.
Yeah.
And people are saying, yes, but long-term South Africa, for heaven's sake. You're either here or you're not here. If you're not here, fine, go somewhere else. But if you're here, invest in those properties. And it fluctuates. But as I said, at least you've got the capital ownership of something which, if you do hit hard times, sell one, but have a few. Make sure your plan is to just keep on going.
So the first one, you have to have some cash, but thereafter,
use it, leverage your bond, and if you've been good with your bank, they'll let you do it. It's the easiest way, I think, to grow assets.
So now you already mentioned that swear word, Airbnb. So from what I've seen, Gauteng, it's a party. Opportunity whenever it's Airbnb or, like you said, a hotel, but I personally don't see it as a very good investment for an owner. Cape Town, however, what is your opinion there for Airbnb?
It's also party there. It's the same risk. So I personally think if you want to go for the holiday market, that's great. People are not going to go to Cape Town for a day.
Yeah.
They're not going to go to Cape Town for a weekend. They're going to go for a week. So if in the rules where you want to invest, it says limited short-term stay, minimum a week, that's probably fine. That's not going to appeal to your party groups. Might, but it's a risk. Do you see what I mean?
Good point, yeah.
Yeah, might be. I'd prefer to see a 2-week. That's where I'd like to say a minimum stay. But if your short-term stay is 1 day,
expect the worst.
Expect trouble.
We get that. So I do community police form, which means we assist police with matters in our area. And the amount of people that have stopped doing Airbnb because people would basically they're staying in a complex or something and they can't really party because of all the rules, etc. So they hire out a B&B for the weekend or Friday night or Saturday night or something. And then a bunch of friends come around with carloads of alcohol and loud music. And sometimes it's larger plots out in Kyami, so they'll have half the house will be Airbnb and half will be them. They can't sleep because the party's going so loud. The neighbors are up in arms because the amount of cars, the amount of noise, the amount of... So we've found these people who've done Airbnbs now in our area, which is a very quiet area, have actually stopped their Airbnbs because of the fact of the people would come to party. And despite the agreements and the regulations, things were ignored, no partying, no etc. But the people would be there. Now you have a huge party with a lot of drunk people on your premises. How do you solve that? And it becomes so problematic. So it is problematic to do those little short terms if you're anywhere near it and it's in any kind of quiet neighborhood. Yeah.
And remember, if you own the unit and you've opened it up for Airbnb, as you say, the people are coming in for a party or a weekend or whatever, and they've disturbed the environment. They've gone. You as the owner are responsible. So be very aware of that. As the owner, you're ultimately responsible. I'm now in the one block where most of it has now become Airbnb purely because the developer has allowed it, and in fact controls a whole lot of tenants, and operates an Airbnb separate company in there. I now rent to somebody who does their own Airbnb, but that's one which I would consider selling. But I'm still making a fair income. They're making money out of it. My tenant's making money out of it, but I'm also getting at least they're able to pay the rental. But yeah, I think just be very aware of what can happen if you invest in the Airbnb.
We've done the maths for some of the potential like first time investors kind of thing, and it's very tough to make better money on Airbnb versus a long-term tenant. If that tenant is you've done the proper selection, you've done your background checks and all that, because with Airbnb what we're finding is Gauteng you cannot reach your 70% occupancy. There's no way. Cape Town, some areas you reach it, but not all areas. So now you have to have bought in a specific area that will achieve that occupancy, but that means you've bought for so much more than other areas. So ultimately, to me, I keep coming back to the realization that most likely you're better off with a long-term tenant. You might get 1% less than you would have gotten, but the peace of mind, the not needing to worry about how many cups were broken,
Exactly.
am I replacing the sheets every 6 months, am I... So many things that can go wrong, and I'm very risk averse in that sense. So when I look at all the potential liability, all the tenants are misbehaving, like you said, and that is goes back to the landlord with a massive fine from the complex.
Right.
So, but it's interesting. I was very fascinated to see how many people in Cape Town are turning negative towards Airbnb.
It's losing its shine in Cape Town, which is quite interesting. I mean, as Rosemary is saying, if you're doing a longer term, if you're doing a week, etc., it's a lot safer. But I've seen a lot of people have turned away from I don't know who punts the money, this huge income that you're going to get from Airbnb, and it's just not sustainable, and it's just not realistic. And especially your costs of you're selling a furnished unit, and now those items degrade rapidly. So that's replacement, repair, and it's a cost factor. It's a big cost factor.
I also just wanted to mention, please address your surety issues if you've got a tenant who has somebody signing for them.
Oh.
Please, please interview the sureties as well. Make sure that they know that they're being put forward as surety, because I've had fraud. I've had fake signatures. I've had children who got hold of mom and dad's salary slip and accounts and submitted no mom and dad are signing my surety, and mom and dad didn't know about it when judgment was taken.
Yeah.
So, just a point.
It's interesting. I mean, we've experienced it. We do a lot of rentals, and I'm very strict on that in a sense that often someone will come and say, but my brother is going to sign for me, so you don't need to do my credit check. You just need to do my brother's credit check. So first of all, with all sureties, we do credit checks for them, but we also do background checks for the surety. So that's where the conversation comes in. So the surety will always be alerted that they've been made surety to something. But what we do, we actually take it a step further. If that person said, I'm the occupant, so don't do my background check, it's a no-go. We want their background check as well and their credit check. And we say to them, listen, if you didn't pay your telecom account and for that reason your credit check's looking bad, fine, we can review, discuss and see. But, I want to know why your credit check is bad, because if it is bad, and you mentioned TPN, obviously on TPN, we can see the history with rentals. So if the credit check is bad because the last 3 years that tenant kept moving, I look at tenant applicants like CV applicants for a job. If I see, if I'm interviewing someone for a job and they kept moving every 6 to 12 months and it's always the employer was terrible or, circumstance, whatever, on the fifth one, I'm already saying, that's a no-go. Tenants is the same thing. Why do you keep moving? I don't want tenants that move every 6 months and it's always the landlord or always the building or whatever. So, no, we do those background checks. And unfortunately, we see so many landlords who, for whatever reason, they just wanted the tenant or whatever, and they get blindsided by that kind of nonsense. And, someone gets placed into their property and then it's 6 months to 12 months to get them out. And then lawyers, interestingly enough, earlier on we mentioned, I always push for negotiation and mediation and all that. We had a tenant who turned out to have a drug problem, which is something you can't test for, unfortunately. There's no credit check that includes, a blood sample yet. But it became a nightmare for the landlord because pretty much every night there was a noise disturbance. And then, the landlord tried to bring in a lawyer who immediately we could see was pushing for litigation, and I could read the language, from the second sentence, oh, this is a litigation matter. And I said, no, we this is a small rental, 1 bedroom. We just need to discuss with the tenant and make it, worthwhile for both parties that the tenant leaves, in a friendly, peaceful manner. Because yes, you're going to win 2 years, 3 years down the line if you go the legal route. What would it cost you for 1 bedroom apartment? So, so it worked out well. 2 weeks later, the tenant was out. But no, tenants, I fully agree with you that property is, for me, I understand property, but I also feel it's tangible. You keep hearing about banks changing to crypto and all that. And you think, but one day you can wake up and your bank account, you don't know what is in there, but at least I can see my house. So I'm all for it. And I also don't fearmonger that rentals is so dangerous. I think if you do proper checks, like you said, you should actually be you should be way more secure than playing on money market.
100%. Yeah.
And then also just going on from when you had to get somebody moved out and talk to them nicely and make them understand it's better for them to move on. Always try and get them to sign an acknowledgement of debt.
Yes. Yeah.
Very important.
Oh.
So that you've got that piece of paper.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they acknowledge that they will pay you on a certain date every month, and this is how much they'll pay. Even if it's a minimal amount, becomes a legal document, and you can hold them to that.
Is there somewhere that someone can go as a person who's wanting to get into this rental game and see all of these things that they should have in place to ensure that they are safe as a person who's going to rent out?
What an interesting question. I don't know of anything.
TPN actually.
Do TPN do that for you?
Is open to the public, private individual, landlords who own one property, as well as investors with many, as well as agents. Anyone can buy on the pay-as-you-go subscription basis, or in our case, obviously, we subscribe to them constantly. But no, you can do it once off. What's nice with TPN is it's a tenant profile network.
Oh, okay.
So the way they work, and it was very clever when they launched it to the market, they made the use of the system free. So even as a landlord or as an investor, it even comes with a built-in rental management function where you can issue invoices. So you only pay for, let's say you want to issue a letter of demand, or you want to purchase their legal paperwork. So they will give you a full rental pack, from your offer to mandates, commissions, anything to do with rentals. And then let's say you're a landlord and you want to issue a letter of demand, or you want to terminate a lease, they legal paperwork worded specifically for tenants. But what's really, to me, the most useful thing that they did is they made it compulsory for us agencies to submit our tenant information monthly.
Okay.
So we use the system. Well, it's not technically free. We obviously pay for every credit check and all that, but the login to the system we can use, but they disconnect us if we don't submit our monthly reports of our current tenants and which ones of them are paying or not. So the more agencies countrywide are using them, when I do a credit check now, one of the pages is their tenant history. And that is the only way they can have that information is because agencies keep feeding it every single month. So I don't only see when someone was blacklisted for non-payment, which only happens so far down the line, and in most cases doesn't even happen. I actually see, Anton, the last 6 months you paid late, because it literally says PL, paid late. Why was that? Are you a constantly late payer, or you did not pay for X amount of months, and then I can see how many rentals you've done. All provided, obviously the agencies feed in, and then I can also see which agency your rental was. Then instead of calling the name Joe Soap that was given to me by a prospective new tenant, I actually call the agency when I do my background check, because I want to speak to the real person, not to your cousin that promised to say nice things about you. And I also want to speak to agencies because sometimes, unfortunately, a landlord is just trying to get rid of you. So they might say nice things.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So in terms of using TPN, whether you use an agent or not, I think a landlord has to use as much as possible, and that's a very easy tool.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
And what's quite interesting, I just had a tenant of mine ask me if I was registered with TPN because he wanted to make sure, because he's a good tenant, he wanted to make sure that he was going to continue having a great track record.
Okay. That's good.
And it is, and we even use it, yes, for cajoling tenants to pay on time, because we say to them, guys, we have to feed our information every single month. So, first of all, there's no such thing as until the 7th is a grace period. There's no such thing in South African legislation that allows you to not pay your rent by the 1st. And also, there's no such thing, you pay your rent on the 1st, therefore it might reflect in the landlord's account on the 3rd because it's a different bank. There's no such thing.
Okay.
So a tenant paying from overseas, for example, cannot say, well, I paid on the 1st, now you can wait a week to get your money. No, the legislation says on the 1st, in the morning when that landlord wakes up, it has to reflect already. So you tenant make a plan when you made your payment,
Yes.
but the landlord should be getting it. But the long story is that you can say to the tenant, but listen, this information gets fed. Now it's going to show this little purple square next to every month that you've paid late. You don't want that. And it actually helps. I'm scared, I'm a bit superstitious, so I'm always scared to say, but I mean, we have 150 tenants, no one's defaulting. That is what you want. Mm-hmm. And that's also the good news story for potential investors, that it's not a bad thing. You just need to do your checks.
Yeah.
And these days, you mentioned bank accounts. TPN also can double verify a bank account, whether the information is correct. But I would say not even needing to pay them, because you should get your PDF statement from the person. And you can literally just check the properties, because they're in Adobe PDF reader. So you literally can just go into properties. And if that statement issue date was the 1st of June at 6 a.m., because it gives you the hour and the seconds, underneath it will say modified. And it cannot be modified if it's the bank statement. Okay. The moment it says modified, then you know.
There's a problem.
Yeah.
Nice.
Which is why we don't take screenshots or, people will say, no, I've taken a photo with my phone. We say, no.
Okay.
Email me the actual statement so we can check the background of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You need to know all these things. But I don't know if there's a manual.
No, exactly.
On you suddenly become a landlord.
Yeah.
I'm not. I don't know of any
landlord for dummies.
Landlord for dummies. Yeah, that's pretty good. Maybe it's an opportunity for a book.
We've got one.
Have you?
Yeah.
30 pages if you're interested
there
in
you
reading.
Go.
We've actually done one for landlords and for tenants, because you both parties
you see,
need to know their responsibilities.
Yeah. Well, the different responsibility. I mean, my one of my tenants, I don't know why it is, but regularly blocks up the toilet.
Well, I don't want to know why.
No, I don't ask, and my plumber just goes and does the job, but I don't pay for that anymore.
Mm.
Oh, because it's a regular thing.
Yeah. And that might encourage the tenant to stop doing whatever they do.
But I mean, wear and tear is a huge bone of contention all the time.
It is. No, it is.
Fair.
Which is wear and tear. What is fair? Yeah. And that's why when you mentioned which properties would you invest in, so I was saying sectional title, though, just a lot easier. Houses, I also have houses that I rent out, and there you've got to be ultra careful with your lease, because they're not just renting the house, they're renting your garden area as well. So if you've got a pretty garden with a very nice swimming pool or whatever, just include all of that and make them aware of the responsibility of what they have to do to maintain that. Alternatively, you get them to pay for a maintenance team that you know very well, and then get them to come in regularly and report to you on what's happening with the garden.
Because I've often seen it with rental properties. How do I know it's a rental? Because of the state of the garden.
Exactly.
And a garden to revive and get back to its original
costs a lot of money.
Tens of thousands of rand.
Yeah.
So,
and then often that's a block when your tenant's leaving and they suddenly realize that they're not getting the deposit back, and they're going to be charged for replanting a garden.
As you said,
it's in your
has
lease.
to be in your agreement,
Yeah. But often you just won't get that, the real cost. But houses are
1 month
tricky.
rent will never cover your real cost if the tenant is not responsible.
Never.
Really.
Yeah.
I've seen some, so I'm a fan of gardening and growing things, and I just know what it'll take. Next person who I recommended, Kristen, is a landscaper, and so the actual physical cost of replanting that garden, resuscitating that garden, is in the tens of thousands. So I think landlords need to know the value, if they're not aware themselves, of actually resuscitating a garden, and to make sure that it is somehow get a check to make sure that it's being maintained, watered, and
that also means lots of checking by the landlord, weekly, monthly visits. And then it becomes a very difficult, particularly if the person has lots of children. The children ride their bicycles through the garden beds and all that sort of. So you've got to be really careful who you're renting to.
And dogs, big dogs,
yeah.
Trash a garden. Yeah. Speaking to a dog lover, so she'd say that's fine, but
Yeah, I was going to say, you also can't have a freestanding home and not have pets.
That's right.
At least with Kyami, you've got also the sheep and
Horses.
donkeys. I think that's where you start. Maybe if you want a landscape garden, maybe draw the line at donkeys. I don't know.
Well, there's fencing. I mean, that it's any equine owner has to know. There's my line where they can come, and here's the line that they can't.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, if you bought a beautiful house in Kyami or Constantia or anywhere like that, and you know the person's moving it, and maybe you've got stables, or they've got big dogs, just design the garden so that the garden is round the home. The balance of the area is play area for the horses or the dogs.
Okay.
Just rather do that before you rent it out, so that the people know where the garden to be maintained is. It will save you an awful lot of money.
So I'm actually thinking going back to the town planning, because you mentioned, Brianston and, City of Joburg kind of doing blanket high density. What does that mean? Because if a person buys a property, surely it is not always the case that they can build a 10-story building, Surely they need to check more about, you mentioned dolomite, for example, certain areas can handle double-story, triple-story, certain can go with a sky riser. How does one know if they want to go into development and they happen to have a friend who is a builder and they think they can go into a high-rise?
Right. Well, there are a whole lot of questions contained in that. And I can honestly say that if you have a large property in most of the single dwelling, what we remembered as single dwelling residential suburbs, which would be Houghton, would have been Brianston, would have been Morningside, would have been Emmarentia. As the legislation stands at the moment with City of Joburg, all of those properties can be converted with a rezoning application to 3-story, 6-story in some hub areas. And this is where it's important to consult with the town planner. In some hub areas, they can go up to 10 or 20 stories. So be very, and the City of Joburg try and have public participation when they're changing a land use scheme or something like that. But most people don't understand it. And this has been my argument with the city, is they'll have public meetings, but they won't have people understanding how it impacts the residents, how it's directly going to impact you. One of my old partners who has a mansion in Brianston, I was talking to him about the ultimate devaluation of properties in particular areas, Houghton, Brianston. If you've bought in an area and paid a lot of money, and as he said to me, he said, Rosemary, right next door to me, I'd suddenly have a 6-story block of flats. And that's apparently legal. So you can develop in those areas. The infrastructure ultimately, if they don't do something about the roads and the sewage and the electricity supply, ultimately those areas will have massive problems, unfortunately. And those properties are those mansions are being devalued because nobody wants to spend 5, 15, 20 million on a beautiful Brianston or Houghton mansion and have 6-story blocks on either side looking down into your garden. It's devaluing your property. And there's a massive property devaluation going on of residents' properties in those areas. If you're looking to speculate, I always say, people say, oh, but I'm going to make a lot of money selling to a developer. You might make money selling your beautiful mansion to a developer who's going to demolish it if you're the first one or even the second one. But once it's been done in an area a few times, you're going to ultimately get land value for your property. Because in that area, all those properties are only worth land value because it's going to be demolished for a block of flats. So be very careful thinking you're going to be the last person standing.
Because you've seen a
because
couple
there's
of
too
trends.
much of it.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
too much of it available in Johannesburg. If they're not going to get the price right in Brianston buying from you, they're going to go somewhere else because it's available in Morningside, it's available in Sandton, it's
Yes.
available in Fourways, it's available in Paulshof, it's available in Yuxke Park. It can happen anywhere. Just be very, very careful.
It's interesting, actually. I was talking to the developer of Mainland Main in Pretoria, and I mean, it's for Pretoria. I think it was a great, absolutely great development because Pretoria actually didn't have
Needed
anything
it.
of the
Yes.
sort. And it's like the Melrose Arch of Pretoria, and still to date is still the only similar kind of setup. But they also said that we weren't going to spend. They had a limit. They knew what the total cost will be. So if someone is trying to hold, then they'll rather build around them or, ignore that one whole street.
Yeah.
Because there were streets where all the owners they knew what was coming. So they said, okay, we're going to hold, we're going to demand X amount. Those streets was just excluded,
Left.
Too bad. We went in the other direction or we just went higher. Whatever their decision
There's always
was.
somebody more desperate.
But also what they said is ultimately there is a cost to what we prepared to spend, versus what we, our potential income will be. So if it becomes unreasonable, we can't buy it. No matter, we might think we can build those penthouse apartments worth 5 million each, but if the owners are forcing us to pay X amount for the land and there is no profit in those 5 million apartments, then we just don't buy it.
No.
Yeah, we go elsewhere.
I mean, if you look at Malbarton, which is next to Lone Hill,
Yes.
in that area, I'm going back, I think it's at least 15 years, where the first person sold out to a developer. And it is still now a mishmash. If you
Yes. True.
if you have a single beautiful hectare property there now, well, most of them have been abandoned. People have left and moved on because it's not a pleasant environment to live in anymore. Because it's a mishmash. Unless you're in one of the sectional title blocks, which are beautiful. They're really, really quite
Yes.
nicely done. But if you still own a hectare piece of land, it's not pleasant anymore. You're just literally waiting to be bought out for land value.
Isn't Crowthorne pretty much the same, closer to you?
Crowthorne's going through massive changes, and it's going to be interesting to see what actually happens with that finally. You've got certain tributary roads that are being developed on the peripheries, and so you've got your start of your build-up happening, but it won't change too dramatically in certain of the inner cores because of your infrastructure, which is going to be a problem. And it's going to become quite messy. It's time to either develop or leave. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. Midrand is one of the fastest developing areas that we have currently in the greater Johannesburg area. And there isn't really a plan guiding it, so it's very messy. So you've got this kind of development with that. It's very piecemeal. And so that's why in our area where we live, we're fighting to keep the urban development boundary out so that we don't have this mishmash. So we're fighting very hard to have a green lung, to keep urban sprawl out, to keep it the highest concentration of equine in southern Africa. And all the horse owners are moving slowly more and more into the area because the peripheries are going, Lone Hill, Brianston, etc., where you used to have horses, you can't have any more. And so they're centralizing and densifying the horse activities around there. And so we're saying it's a 2 billion rand annual generation that's generated in the equine industry. It's an industry. Leave it.
Sorry to interrupt. Can I correct you? It was 2 billion in 2016.
So now we know what it is. It's densified so much more.
Way more.
Yeah.
Way more. And also, sorry to add to enhance what you were saying, is that it's the only area in the northern area of Johannesburg where the equine sports facility exists.
Yeah.
So when there are shows for show jumping or even polo. We have some of the polo things still out near Eskom. We have some of the best horse breeds in the area as well. That gives massive job opportunities to people who want to be involved in horse racing. So it's the vets, it's the farriers, it's the feed, it's the horse feed, and it's horse riding equipment. It's massive, and it's becoming more and more intense just in that particular area because we've lost Chartwell. Chartwell now is part of that Lanceria master plan. So all those agricultural areas are changing.
Is that so?
Yes. From
Very
Chartwell
fast.
to Krugersdorp. Chartwell along that Krugersdorp area towards Lanceria. That's all become part of the Lanceria master plan, which is a presidential project. And it's looking at industry. It's looking at high density. It's looking at mini hubs. So outside the urban development boundary, just in the north of Joburg, where Kyami is one of the last major equine areas for Gauteng.
So how do you guys feel about the Formula One?
Formula One's going to be fantastic.
Marvelous.
So we support it. It's they actually created
Want effect to
not at all. I mean, if
on the other side.
Yeah, so the line is the ridge. So funny enough, I'm the last house on the ridge. That's the start of the urban development boundary, which is the Kyami Business Park, and then we're the plots which are now outside the urban development boundary. So we're actually on
so
that
what street is the
threshold.
boundary street?
So the street is what they call Zinnia.
Yeah.
So Zinnia Street is the edge of that. Yeah.
Okay.
And the urban development boundary goes along the edge of Kyami racecourse. So I know there's been some developers have said, City said I can just move the urban development boundary. No, you've got to go through a whole process.
Yeah.
It's a 5-year thing. So and there certainly will be massive outcry from the community.
Okay. So Formula One, what do we think?
So Formula One, we think is great for Johannesburg as a whole. It's great for the country as a whole. What we would potentially see is if a person was quite clever, they would speculate on setting up boutique hotels to service that. But again, that's once a year that you're going to have the event. So people have got to say. So people say, oh, Formula One is coming to Kyami, and they say, oh, it's going to change the landscape completely. Yes, for that 3 weeks of the year. So 3 weeks of the year, do you have enough that's going to sustain that entire model? So say somebody says, oh, we can set up a hotel because we're going to have all these guests coming, etc. Sure, now, so for 3 weeks you have full occupancy and you've got all these international guests, etc. It's going to be crickets for 11 months and 1 week.
Yeah.
What are you going to do to sustain that model for the 11 months that you've got downtime? There's not enough racing and activity. So the financial model that keeps Kyami Grand Prix circuit going is events. It's not the racetrack. The racetrack is an addendum that's basically funded through the events and the conferences that they hold within the facility. That's the financial model, not the racing. And so people also, if they're going to in any way invest in the potential, remember it hasn't been guaranteed. This is they've been given the permission to upgrade to that spec. Hasn't been granted that they're going to definitely race there yet. So say people speculate and say, I'm going to set up a hotel, I'm going to do this because we're going to have an influx of, let's say, probably 20, 30,000 support crew and tourists, etc. 20, 30,000, great. Now we've got all these big things. Bang, that's crickets for 11 months. Then what? So I think people have to kind of think on the back end of no activity. Is there enough draw for people to travel all the way into Midrand to sustain those facilities? So it's going to be an interesting thing.
What about the roads though? Because in my mind, these roads are the most congested in the morning and afternoon peak hour. I'm very often been stuck there. So, you
all
know,
have.
you obviously you live there as well. But how is that going to handle even for your 3 weeks? Because I literally envision a helicopter as the only option.
That's literally our argument. So what's happened is if you travel along the R55, if you travel along M71 main road, what happens is it's 4 lanes, 2 lanes, 4 lanes, 2 lanes, 4 lanes, 2 lanes, 3 lanes. because the developers were required to do what we said is bulk contributions, and they would fix up 20 meters of road, and then it would go down. So we're saying, why do this K56 road where you're going to be putting millions and millions of rands into just one little thing that serves only developers? Why don't you then put that money instead into the M71 or the R55, have those roads be dual carriageway the entire way, which is going to stop all this channeling of traffic, which is dangerous because it causes huge amounts of accidents, etc. So for us, we're saying your responsibility as a city is first to the R55 and then Main Road M71. And then once
Which one
those...
is M71?
It's a main road which goes from
Main Road.
Kyami Shopping Centre past Leocorp up to Lone Hill. Yeah.
Okay.
Because think of that road that keeps on pinching all the time. It's a nightmare to travel.
And also now it's compacted by regular development approvals. For example, the in Glenfinesse there was that market, the farmers market or whatever that was.
Prison Break.
Yeah. They shouldn't have approved that without major upgrade for the majority of that road. But that shouldn't have been approved anyway. If it was a farmer's market, it should have remained a farmer's market, which was the only zoning that was permitted. But actually it's turned into a event.
A shopping mall.
Shopping mall event. Thank you for saying that, because when I say it, people look at me funny. So thank you. An events function facility, a shopping centre, and it has destroyed that little section of that neighbourhood. So
would you say that? Because I got the feeling that it revived a very what appeared to be a bit sleepy backwards.
It's supposed to be agricultural, relaxed environment. And so what's happened is essentially the neighbours adjoining that have sold now to the developer.
Is that so?
The funny thing is things go in trends. So people are fickle. They always want to buy in something new. They want to buy, they don't like what they call brownfields, which is older developments where there's infrastructure. They want to go to the next trend, to the next thing. And Prison Break was hugely popular. It really blossomed. It really did very well. And currently we're seeing now a slump off because, the congestion is terrible to get there, terrible to get out. And so people eventually have now gone off trend and they're saying, I'm going to go to the next thing. So anytime anyone does developments, we had this with Kyami Corner Shopping Centre, big upswell, big dip. And so people are fickle. And so now there were properties bought for parking and we're seeing these kind of just turn into crickets because things have gone off trend. So sure, glad I'm not a developer and I'm glad it's not my business.
No, and it's very cautious. I would be very cautious if I was a developer in that area. I know many people have speculated in the area, but the city has said themselves, if they do expand that area, they will go bankrupt because although you get developer to put in infrastructure, the city has to maintain it themselves. And they don't have the capacity.
And if you look at our road maintenance and if you look at our electricity maintenance, where we're staying in Kyami, on our road 3 years ago, they changed the transformer on the pole, which went up in 72 or 73, and now they're having to change those. So we're experiencing huge power outages over any time people see clouds, they're like, oh, we're going to lose rain, because then the transformers get hit and it goes down and we've got no power for sometimes 2-3 days. So say people were to speculate on having something large set up, just make sure your generator and your fuel tanks with diesel are going to be there, because the power dips are staggeringly big because it's aging infrastructure that hasn't been upgraded. So we're happy because it keeps out certain people, but if a person isn't aware of aging infrastructure and the fact that it's all septic tanks, they're going to have certain very significant costs on them.
Can I go just back to what you said at Carlswald, Crowthorne? You mentioned Crowthorne and Carlswald area. What is interesting is that, as you mentioned, some pockets are still very much agricultural. Some of them are in very sensitive wetland environments. And just recently, a collective group in Carlswald have got together to do a similar thing to what was done when Bolu was created. The developers of Bolu created that area that is call it an estate. It wasn't really an estate, but it was farms that were put together essentially because they saw Pretoria and Johannesburg coming together. And so they wanted an environment where people could still have their horses and still ride. And of course, we do have the Kyami Equestrian Park, which is an international equestrian event, and because people come from all over to compete in there. And we have FEI competitions, which is the international competition, so they can compete at that international level. But anyway, when they created Bolu, they then put in personal real rights into the title deed to say that all buildings have to be approved by that original group and all sales have to be approved by that original group.
All right.
So developers wouldn't come in and flatten it and buy pieces of land or whatever. And that still stands because they're personal real rights. They can't be removed from the title deed conditions. That still stands. And so there's a group in Carlswald who are now have chosen to do the same thing because they're all like-minded. They want to preserve their greater area from high-density development. And on the edge are 6-story blocks of townhouses. But this collective, I think it's about 20, 23, maybe more properties. One property is 18 hectares alone. They are now putting real personal rights into the collective title deeds of everybody, which costs about that costs about 5,000 rand to do. So each individual's paying to have that condition put in their deeds, so that in perpetuity, those properties will be protected with their MOU, which is an ethos on how they want to maintain that rural environment and the wetland area. So that's encouraging, you know.
So that's back to a buyer. Then they need to know what questions to ask, because how would one know? Let's say now a buyer wants to buy that 18 hectare, and with the idea that they will be building the latest high density. If the owner doesn't tell them, will that be in the title deed?
It'll be in the title deeds.
Okay.
So that's why I'm saying every buyer, please check your title deeds. Most people don't even know what the title deeds are. Yeah. Please, they are the most critical piece of information because they override any council legislation. They're a higher level of law. And if there's some restriction in your title deed condition,
and if you didn't read it, and no one told you.
And there are some conditions in title deeds which can be removed by an application to the City of Johannesburg.
Okay.
But as the Carlswald people are doing, they're making it a personal real right. So they list the bodies that are responsible for overseeing that condition.
Right.
And I know there's some town planners who make money from developers and want to have these things removed, so they complain to the council that these people are trying to do their own town planning. Actually, no, they're just trying to preserve an area, and that's everybody's right to do. Yeah.
But and the next buyer cannot override this and say, well, now it's a new owner.
No.
They can apply, but it's
then the rest of the people can push back against.
Yeah, if that collective groups then say, let's give this up, you know, then they collectively have to do it. And if one person says no, then it won't happen.
And then in terms of your investment into commercial, you know, you touched on this, and it's often actually made me wonder the proliferation of shopping centers. I cannot understand how, you know, just speaking of Kyami Corner, then we've got Mall of Africa, further down Crowthorne Shopping Centre, is it called? You know, it's not even, what is it, a kilometre between Kyami Corner and the next shopping centre.
When Kyami Corner was approved, there were at least 10 other shopping centres within a 10-kilometre radius, which was madness.
Yeah.
And that's why you have a city department called town planning. But unfortunately, you know, I think town planning have forgotten that aspect, because now what happens is they're essentially application processes rather than people who looked at an area and said, okay, in this area we have to do some structure planning because we've got too many schools, we've got too many shopping centres. Sadly, nobody's doing that oversight in fact, that Kyami corner would have made a fabulous country hotel because it was a beautiful site. The view from there is magnificent.
Yeah,
View
true.
north. It would have been a great hotel. And there was major outcry by the community against that. Well, I can tell you, Kyami corner lost millions.
Really?
Millions.
It was hemorrhaging money. It was insane how much money was being lost, and
lost by whom?
By the owners.
Yeah.
By the owners. But not only the owners, it was actually lost by people who owned other shopping centres in the close vicinity.
Oh, of course.
Because they had to change character. Their market was removed.
Yes.
We were lucky not to have major white elephants thanks to the approval of Kyami corner. But those shopping centres have just moulded into something different.
Right.
Perhaps not as profitable. But, yeah.
So if you want to be a developer and make money if you want to play the long game, because obviously if someone is a hit and run kind of person and wants to get some people to invest into a project, which they're then immediately going to run away from once it's done, then that we're not talking about these people. But if you are someone who wants to develop a shopping center, or even offices. I don't know if there are any need for offices in Gauteng at this stage. New, but
a lot of them are being converted.
Where would you be looking? So is it Gauteng or is it Cape Town? I would imagine.
Do you know where the market is for new shopping centres? I think the north of Johannesburg is saturated completely. But I think the market that hasn't, which has been overlooked primarily, is the market for rural township development. There's still a huge need to offer to the lower LSMs. Of course, developers are greedy. I'm an ex-developer, but I know they're motivated by money rather than servicing a community as such. And I think that's why no really nice facilities are being built for the very low LSM market.
Okay.
And that's where the market has been forgotten. I think it's when you build a shopping centre, you're going to look at who your anchor tenant is going to be. And it might be either a Boxer, which is a lower LSM for the Pick and Pay group, or it might be ShopRite, which is the lower LSM for Checkers. And they will tell you what population group they need to make their store run. And once you have that major anchor tenant, after that you'll get your smaller stores that will come along and join in your shopping centre. But you have to get that demographic right for either the big box, one of the big box supermarkets. They'll tell you exactly what population size they need. And there are people who will professionally look at a site and they will say this shopping centre close by. I recently looked at one for a developer friend of mine, and it was a fabulous piece of land. It was a fabulous piece of land. But the road infrastructure in the area was going to change, which would essentially cut off that piece of land.
Oh, no.
So for your market to get there, it would be complicated. And within 2.5 kilometres was a very successful shopping centre with an anchor tenant. You if you're a developer, you don't want to take on that competition. You shouldn't in your right mind be keen to take on that competition. Just keep on looking for better sites. And they're really good sites, and I'm talking down in the Innerdale area, those sort of areas which are not being served at all. But then when you do that, you've got to look, as I mentioned earlier, one that I looked at recently, you've got to make sure that you do your soils tests because there is a lot of dolomite in that area. Make sure it's not impacted by any environmental sensitivities.
And whose responsibility is this? The developer.
Yeah. And then, as I said, you can build on dolomite, but, the cost is going to go up by at least 20% onto the cost of your
20%.
20% minimum, because of the requirements in terms of the the council's requirements for building.
Stabilities and foundations.
But I mean, even so, because we're sitting in the middle of, I think, the Dolomite capital of South Africa, probably. But I mean, literally, I come down from my home to here, and there's a massive sinkhole that a building disappeared on John Foster. I don't know if you guys have heard, but I mean, it's been over a year now, and we don't see it going anywhere. So basically, luckily, the road is it's a wide enough, so it's lost now one of the lanes, but also the buildings alongside it. So even if you build, however you build, is that a risk if you build on Dolomite?
The risk always remains with the developer or the owner. I know people say, oh, Dolomite's all over the place, we build over it. That's fine if you're prepared to take the risk. But, if you lose part of a building, you've got to pay for the repair of that, which will be extensive. I know a townhouse developer who told me not so long ago it happened to them. They took the risk. They did their raft foundations, and the center of the block collapsed.
Wow.
They had massive expenses. The profit for that development just went out the window.
Wow.
Massive
Wow.
costs.
Okay.
So it happens to the best of them. And rather stay away from
regardless
it.
of your Dolomite, regardless of your raft foundation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Be very careful.
Okay.
And I know you get public liability with your engineers and all the rest of it. Don't go down that road. Rather stay away.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think Irene is way down that road now, so there's no turning back. We just need to hope, hope for the best.
Yeah, I think there are a few engineers hoping that nothing happens.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. Any other thoughts you guys want to share?
I'm good. Yeah.
There was something that
This is tax threshold. I mean, this is something I always wonder about. Is tax is this elusive thing you never think about until it happens. Is what happens from a wealth tax point of view? So say I have one property, then I have two. Is there an area that it suddenly changes in terms of property ownership?
Well, I mean, one of the most important things that you've got to consider is your capital gains tax.
Yes.
So when you sell in your calculation, you've got to make preparation for having to hand that over to the government. And my advice would be to stay above the law in all those aspects.
Yeah.
But I just think if you keep on rolling over your money, keep a debt for every property you've got. Also, that helps because your maintenance is tax deductible. Just make sure you have a good accountant looking after your the process, the way you're doing things. I have no problem in upgrading my units, changing hobs and changing bathrooms and all the rest of it because it's tax deductible as well. You've got to keep your units looking good, and the taxman helps you with that. But yes, I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to take a knock on capital gains tax. Cape Town will have it worse than us, I'm afraid.
If you bought in the right spot.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I mean, it's interesting with Cape Town specifically, or I've been looking into that market a lot of late, and some properties are flying off the shelves, but then other properties are not. So it's not as straightforward. It's not the goose that lays the golden egg, no matter what. You need to choose your goose correctly.
Got to be very careful in Cape Town where you invest.
Especially as some of the houses being older houses. My cousin bought into one. You can't change the frontage, etc., because they're now heritage houses.
Yeah.
So you do your homework in Cape Town. It's everybody just talks a bold splash, and you've got north, south. There's every area has its draw and has its drawback, and
And if you're not living in Cape Town and you want to invest in Cape Town, please go and live there every season before you decide where you want to live. It's I lived there for 20 years. Be very careful where you live. Yeah.
Yeah, look, you're speaking to the converted. I'm not enjoying the 4 seasons in a day. So, the Cape Townians love to say that. So, I would go select times of the year.
Yes.
And be aware of the big flux and changes. My aunt has the most exquisite apartment units in Granger Bay, which is it's so fantastic. Now there's a big couple of billion rand development proposed for there. And you've got to say, do I sell now because it could devalue my place, or do I hold on because it's going to increase the value of my place? So be very aware of the potential speculation and development that happens in Cape Town, because when it happens, it's a big knock.
And also remember, when you buy with a view, you have no right to a view. And in Cape Town, exactly what that happens. If we look at Camps Bay, Sea Point, whatever, you are allowed to increase density, and if you block somebody's view, sorry for you. So the only place you're guaranteed a view is right on Beach Road, Sea Point, for example, where nothing's going to happen opposite that. But if you're on a slope, just buyer beware.
I see this in complexes, especially the new ones. When Waterfall was starting, when Helderfontein started, people think, oh, look at this incredible sunset view that I've got. And no one is looking at the fact that you've got
in front of
units in front of you. Yeah. And 9 times out of 10, people build right up to the edge of their unit. You're looking into someone's bathroom. So that exquisite view of nature that you've got now, try and visualize that you've got another 5 units in front of you. Yeah. And man, they can do what they like, obviously within the regulations. But 9 times out of 10, people's sunsets become someone's bathroom. So it's the least attractive part of the building to look at.
Yes, but as you say, that people can do in terms of the regulations, just be prepared that regulations change.
Also.
Exactly.
They change.
Had this in our area where the building regulation was 10 meters. Now it's 1. And people have a unit here and...
It's actually 0.
Yeah.
But for that reason, I think
we don't like to say it.
having a clever, not clever, but having a practical architect that's not just self-serving in terms of I want something that looks super flashy for my portfolio. They need to also think of the person who's going to live in the place, resale value and all that, because if you design your property to have privacy regardless of your neighbors, but you can't be exactly what you said, you can't be relying on your neighbors for privacy. So yes, there are some of those high-end developments where we sell, where unfortunately the unit was designed first and then the neighbors came later on, and all these things. Look, I'm not a big, I don't put a lot of value on view. I think if I was in Cape Town, obviously I would, but where we are here in Gauteng, I don't see anyone using balconies. I don't see anyone sitting admiring a mountain or ocean here, so the view sounds nice until you live in a house and then you never see it again, if you had it. But you also don't get so much of it here. So rather than build your privacy, because you might not enjoy that view when the neighbor comes and builds their living spaces or entertainment room facing your main bedroom, for example.
I photographed a house this week, and I photographed the bathroom and sent it to a friend, and I said, could you use this bathroom? It's a gorgeous shower, gorgeous out across the thing. There's no screening. They've got some sort of detailed things with cutouts. You're basically showering in front of everyone.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just, when they put it in, there was no one in the other stands. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Look at us. We're in.
Yes.
Out. And one in Stain City, a bath. It's literally glass window. Isn't that gorgeous? I've got my gorgeous little pot plants around me. Straight onto the neighbor.
Yeah.
And I'm like, for the neighbor, maybe they're going, oh, but I don't know,
maybe that's the intention.
Everyone's got their look,
I just also wanted to bring in here some for people who live in already resident in environments where development is taking place in your greater area. Please take note of notices on gates. Please take part in being part of your community. When the council call for input to their integrated development plan, most people don't even know what that is.
Yes.
Please go along I know. I mean, I've literally been carried out of one because it turned into a bottle throwing, chair throwing, angry event. So you know,
What were you guys opposing?
I wasn't opposing anything. They just happened to mix. I live in Kyami, and they just happened to include Diepsloot in the meeting, and Diepsloot were fed up with their councillors, and they started throwing chairs. And fortunately, one of the council officials who knows me literally picked me up and ran out with me, so I wouldn't get injured. I was just taking part in the IDP. I wasn't even talking. So yeah, it wasn't against me. He was just getting me out of danger. But please, I mean, take part, because so many people complain once it's too late.
Yeah.
Yes.
Rather take part. Rather have your say.
Yeah.
And if you don't want a 20-story block of flats going up, tell the councillors, get your community together and say, not in our area, because there are specific hubs where that should be taking place.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing is that if there are no objections, they just are being allowed to do things anyway.
Yeah.
So rather make your voice heard and get to know your councillor, get to know your community, and make your voice heard. Yeah, participate. Yeah.
Okay, so do your homework. That's the theme of the day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Always.
Well, thanks so much, guys. It's
Thank
been
you.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely learned a lot. So let's hope we help some people with their investment decisions.
Yes.
In
Great.
future.
Yeah. It's a fun environment to be in. I wouldn't be in anything else. I'm sure you wouldn't either,
Same.
will you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you ready to start buying now?
Not yet.
To take a bit more convincing.
I'm too cautious.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.